A quiet evening at home ended with the sound of gunfire. 2 shots, 2 targets, but only 1 victim.
It is very unusual to have a survivor in a violent crime like this, especially one who can provide key details.
Both the survivor and the crime scene offered valuable clues about the attackers.
It was critical to understand the connection between the offenders and the crime scene. We suspected the victim's house may hold the key to solving this case.
Lakeland, Florida, a small town outside Tampa. This is usually a fairly quiet place, but that was about to change. Early in the evening, police received a call from a worried neighbor. She heard shots coming from next door. Detective Jim Skelton was called to the scene.
The Sheriff's Department received a 911 call in reference to 2 gunshots and a hysterical woman screaming. 2 intruders had entered the residence through the back door and shot her boyfriend.
The survivor was Cynthia Fields, and the victim was her boyfriend of many years, Jim Jeter.
After shooting her boyfriend, they aimed a shotgun at her, was sitting on the couch, and fired 1 round and missed. Now, according to her, they left out the back door.
Special Agent Tommy Ray, 17-year veteran of the Florida Department of Law Enforcement, joined the investigation.
Cynthia was checked on the scene by the EMTs. She was then transported to the Lakeland Regional Hospital.
As night fell, a dog team searched for the killer's scent, but came up empty. The forensic team didn't fare much better.
Sheriff's deputies as well as investigators canvassed the scene. There was no shoe impressions, no latent fingerprints, no tire tracks, either in the driveway area or off to the side of the road.
The offenders seemed to have vanished without a trace. But could they have left something behind?
They fired into the coffee table. There was a pattern similar to that of the victim Jeter that was shot in the chest.
Shotgun pellets were recovered at the scene. Agent Ray sent the pellets to the lab and conducted a background check of the victims, looking for leads or connections.
Could Cynthia or Jimmy have been involved in criminal activity? A lot of different type scenarios was, going through the minds of the investigators at the time. Maybe Cynthia was involved and maybe this was a staged scene.
Deputies interviewed Cynthia's friends and family.
Cynthia wasn't the type who would be involved in something like this. Cynthia's father assured us that Jimmy was an upstanding citizen, had a long military background, and was just a hard-working guy.
Agent Ray's investigation showed that Cynthia and Jim were a quiet couple without any apparent enemies.
Both had no involvement in any kind of illegal activities whatsoever.
But Cynthia remained the only eyewitness to the murder. Once she was released from the hospital, Agent Ray brought her to the station to look at mugshots while her memory was still fresh.
We showed Cynthia a photo pack of individuals from the area that were involved in burglaries and other various crimes. We were hoping Cynthia could identify one of the individuals, but she was unable to do so.
As none of the faces in the mugshots were familiar to Cynthia, Agent Ray decided on another approach.
We had a crime scene sketch artist there so she could give the best description of the suspects at that time.
Cynthia had no trouble recalling what they looked like.
She said, they were 2 white males and that she would never forget their face.
And Cynthia remembered something else that could prove important.
She said that a small blue car, had circled the block the day prior.
Police released the drawings and a detailed description of the offenders.
This is the homicide that occurred off Cumbie Road and Everett Street. But both the suspects are white males between 5'7", 5'10", mid-20s.
With the sketches in hand, deputies hit the streets. But no one came forward with an ID or a tip-off. Police were without a lead. Agent Ray wanted to understand the minds of Jim Jetter's killers and knew that criminal profiler Dale Hinman could help.
What stood out about this case was the fact that we had a survivor victim, but we had to wonder why Cynthia was left alive.
Hinman's many years of experience allow her to analyze the psychology of a crime by examining the crime scene itself.
Even though the criminals left very little physical evidence behind, the behavioral evidence told us what we needed to know. It's always important to see where the crime took place. We thought there may be additional clues at the scene that may suggest why Cynthia and Jim were targeted.
Yeah, this is a house where the shooting occurred. Right out here is where the car was heard to have sped off that night. But according to Cynthia, the day prior, there was a blue car that she saw circle the block that she reported.
To Agent Hinman, that suggested an intriguing possibility.
We could have somebody circling the block waiting to pick up the offenders after the crime was committed, so potentially we could have a third offender who was involved.
Yes, we could.
If there was a getaway driver, his identity remained as much of a mystery as the two killers.
What was the point of entry?
It's around back, let me show you. Yeah, when we came to the back here, we found that the screen was ripped. Right here's where the victim, Jimmy and Cynthia, were at the time. They were sitting on the couch. They were watching a movie.
What were the lighting conditions in the room?
The television was the only thing that was on at the time. Well, what had happened is when the two guys come rushing in, the suspects, one had the sawed-off shotgun. Jimmy was in shot, point blank, to the chest.
The offenders then shot at Cynthia from point-blank range, but somehow missed.
It's interesting that as close as the offender is to both of the victims, that he missed her. Was there any evidence recovered that would help us to understand what else occurred here?
There was pellets that was recovered at the autopsy that we forwarded to the FDLE crime lab.
Perhaps the ballistics lab can give us some more information on how this happened.
The investigators first had to rule out the most obvious motive.
Was anything taken?
According to Cynthia, this is the bedroom they ran into. They were here for just a matter of seconds. There was a couple of drawers that were open, then they ran out the back door the same way they came in.
They seemed to know the layout of the house, and they acted like they were looking for something specific in the bedroom.
The signs indicated theft, yet nothing had been taken.
Perhaps they're just very paranoid and very excitable and have committed this crime, somewhat in a frenzy. Sounds like this was a planned incident where the individuals came here looking for something, and whatever they expected to be here was just absolutely not here.
So what were they looking for? Hinman needed to review the case file.
Cynthia described the offenders as being very aggressive and out of control. This suggested to us the offenders may have been using a drug like cocaine. That would explain why they missed her.
Agent Hinman's profile was starting to come together.
The fact that they went straight to the bedroom suggested that they were expecting to find something specific. We thought they were looking for drugs, and even though they didn't find any, they knew just where to go.
The crime scene told Hinman that the killers could have been high on drugs and inexperienced with shotguns. But she wanted to be sure.
People who have never used a shotgun probably imagine that the pellets would cause a plate-sized hole. So how could they expect to miss a target at such close range?
Hinman and Ray met with ballistic technician Cara Tallman to see what this kind of weapon can do from short distances.
We're very interested in seeing the shotgun pattern so we can try to determine what happened at the crime scene.
Technician Tallman set up a demonstration. She fired a similar shotgun from different distances.
This is our pattern at 1 foot. You have no separation of the shot quite yet. At 5 feet, we have definite individual pellets have gone through around the edges.
From a few feet, a short barrel shotgun shoots a tight pattern, not a wide spray of pellets. When the offender shot at Cynthia, he probably assumed he had killed her. This suggested to us that he was not that familiar with shooting a shotgun.
The tests showed that the offenders were amateur marksmen and reinforced Agent Hinman's original profile about their behavior.
Based on the size of the pattern, we knew just how far the shooter was from the victim. At this range, it should have been extremely hard to miss, but we thought we knew why. Because Cynthia described the offenders as being very frantic and looking for something, perhaps he's been involved in drug use, so it's more frenzied, more aggressive.
Had the killers been looking for drugs? And if so, why had they chosen Jim and Cynthia?
So far, the investigation has shown that Jimmy and Cynthia have no criminal background at all. There's no appearance of any kind of drug use between the two at all.
The victims had no connection to the drug world. But what about their house?
Jimmy and Cynthia just moved in 2 weeks prior.
Well, since the shooter appeared to be looking in the house for drugs, perhaps we should be looking at who lived in the house before they moved in.
With this new possibility, Agent Ray brought in his colleague, Detective Brian Price, from the Sheriff's Office. Detective Price learned that the previous resident was a man named Clifton Moore.
Clifton had lived in that residence for 2 or 3 years. Mr. Jeter had just moved into that residence prior to him being shot.
What Price learned about Moore took the investigation in a different direction.
Clifton Moore was determined to be a drug dealer.
At first, police couldn't find him, and it turned out there was a good reason. He was under federal protection.
He was being held as a material witness involving his testimony on 2 Latin drug dealers that were currently in custody.
Moore was in witness protection at a safe house. Detective Price arranged a meeting.
It made sense that, based on his testimony, they would receive extensive jail terms, that they would either themselves or contract with others to eliminate him as a potential witness.
Clifton Moore was about to turn state's evidence against 2 dealers. Could they have tried to silence him?
Clifton Moore used to deal cocaine out of his house, and he was planning to testify against 2 Latin drug traffickers. We had to wonder if these individuals had taken a contract out on his life.
Had the gunmen been seeking to silence Moore? And in a bizarre case of mistaken identity, had they killed the wrong man? Jim Jeter had been murdered. Police believed that he was mistaken for Clifton Moore, the previous occupant of his home.
Moore was getting ready to testify against 2 drug traffickers. We had to consider whether this was a professional hit.
Agent Ray and Detective Price called a meeting to go over the latest developments.
Yeah, Brian and I talked to Clifton Moore. Clifton told us that he had testified against 2 Hispanic drug dealers, and he was concerned that maybe these 2 drug dealers had come back looking for him at the residence.
Well, we went and interviewed the 2 alleged drug dealers, and they denied, naturally, of having any involvement in the shooting.
Police didn't buy it, but Hinman thought that the dealers might be telling the truth.
But as good as the lead sounds, this is not a typical firearm for this type of crime. Because bringing a short barrel shotgun to a scene like this, anybody who was in the neighborhood that saw the individuals approach this house would notice that type of gun. When the gun goes off, it's very, very loud, so it's going to attract attention in the neighborhood. And then also the fact that the individual didn't move the coffee table and ensure that he had actually killed Cynthia. This doesn't sound at all like it's a professional hit.
But if the drug traffickers weren't involved, what about Clifton Moore?
So Moore still may be the link that we should be looking at, because if he's a former drug dealer that lived in that home, it could be a prior customer of his that went there thinking that there was drugs or money there at the house.
To solve the case, they needed to know who these customers were. Then, Agent Ray received a surprising call.
It was about 8:30 when I received a phone call. The guy said they had some information on a homicide case, if I could take care of some active warrants for petty theft and DUI.
The caller wouldn't give his name or say to which homicide he was referring. He wanted to make a deal. But Agent Ray was skeptical.
It's very rare that you get a call where someone says that I can definitely clear up a murder case.
But if the caller could help, Agent Ray was willing to talk.
And I assured him if he wasn't involved in the homicide, which he stated he wasn't, that we would do everything we could to help take care of the misdemeanor warrants.
Even though the caller wouldn't provide details of the crime, Agent Ray agreed to a meeting.
The caller said he would be standing in front of the Greyhound bus station. The investigators waited on the corner, not knowing whether he was going to arrive.
And when he did, Agent Ray was stunned. It was someone police had seen before.
The caller's name was Joel Kegley. Kegley's photo was in the original photo pack that was shown to Cynthia Fields, but she didn't recognize him.
After I picked Joel up from the bus station, he directed me across town, and it didn't take long to realize that he was directing me to Jim and Cynthia's house.
As his directions led Ray towards the Jetta crime scene, Kegley started to talk about a murder he had witnessed.
He pointed out Jim and Cynthia's house. In asking him some of the details of what had occurred, he stated that two guys entered the house. He heard two gunshots. When I asked him where he was at when he heard the gunshots, he stated that he was in the bushes hiding.
Alarm bells started to go off for investigators.
Kegley said he had been hiding at the time of the murder. That was suspicious. They realized he wasn't just a witness.
We knew from the details that Joel gave us that he was definitely a lot more involved than what he had indicated. We believed that he was probably the getaway driver.
When he was pressed about inconsistencies in his story, Kegley admitted that he was in the getaway car the night of Jetta's murder. But two other men had entered the house, Raymond Eldridge and Richard Harris.
Kegley told the investigators that Eldridge and Harris were high on cocaine on the night of the murder. That's probably why it happened the way it did.
He said that they were known for robbing drug dealers and that he brought these two guys to the residence to rob Clifton Moore, who was a cocaine dealer that Joel Kegley had dealt with in the past.
The information about a blue car spotted circling the house the night before the murder began to make sense.
Joel Kegley had been to the house before and he knew the layout. He went with the other two men to case the neighborhood the day before the attack.
Kegley told them the layout of the house, but not what Clifton Moore looked like. The pieces now began to come together. The offenders thought that Jim Jetta was Clifton Moore. Special Agent Ray called off the deal and arrested Joel Kegley. The hunt began for Raymond Eldridge and Richard Harris.
We knew that we needed to find the other two guys that Joel had described, the two killers that had actually gone into the house.
Eldridge and Harris weren't at large. In fact, they were already in jail for a bank robbery, having been arrested 2 days after the Jetta murder.
After we had identified Richard and Ray and had gotten arrest photos of them, we made photo packs to show Cynthia Fields, a surviving victim. She immediately pointed to Richard Harris and Raymond Eldridge and said, "There's no doubt." It just took her a matter of seconds.
But what about Joel Kegley?
The fact that Joel said he was outside the house made sense. If he was the getaway driver, Cynthia wouldn't have seen him. That's why she couldn't recognize him in the photos.
Richard Harris and Raymond Eldridge were both sentenced to at least 25 years in prison. Joel Kegley received 7 years for his role as an accomplice.
Jim and Cynthia should have been safe and secure in the privacy of their own home. But through the actions of others, they were in the wrong place at the wrong time. No one will ever be able to make sense of this tragedy, but with Cynthia's assistance and the hard work of everyone involved in this investigation, we were able to bring her justice.